What if the most effective way to improve the world right now, like and to actually fight for justice, care for your community, and live a deeply meaningful life, is to, truly believe that this entire planet is eventually going to be destroyed?
Right. I mean, it sounds like a complete contradiction. Our modern instinct tells us that if the world has an expiration date, we should just give up. Like, nihilism just seems like the only logical response,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. But that is the exact opposite of the conclusion reached in the stack of notes and outlines you brought for us today. So for this deep dive, we are unpacking the materials you provided regarding David Pawson's teachings, specifically on the second letter of Peter, chapter 3.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating text.
It really is. And I have to say, going through your sources, this isn't just like a dry theological commentary. It is a profound paradigm shift. I mean, it challenges you to look at your daily routine, your ambitions, and your struggles, and view this entire world not as your permanent home, but as a temporary school for Christians, a school that will, one day suddenly close its doors. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, I think what's so interesting here is how the source material kind of flips our usual approach to apocalyptic texts. Often people read ancient prophecies just to satisfy a morbid curiosity about how the world ends.
Oh, for sure. They just want a timeline.
Exactly, they want dates. But Pawson's outline argues that the biblical author Peter is doing something much more grounded. He's using a very specific, fiery vision of the ultimate future to demand a specific kind of character in the present.
Right.
So the mission of this text, and our mission in discussing these notes today, is to understand how an ancient apocalyptic vision is actually intended to be a highly practical, everyday guide for how you live on a random Tuesday.
And to really grasp the mechanics of this, I think we need to lean heavily into the foundational metaphor your sources emphasize, which is the classroom.
Yeah, the school metaphor.
Right. There's this brilliant anecdote in the reading about a 5-year-old boy being dropped off for his very first day of school. And when the bell rings at 3 p.m., his teacher tells him it's time to go home. And he just stares at her in absolute horror.
I love this story.
He bursts into tears and says, "But my father said I was here for 10 years.
It's just a perfect illustration of how human beings process time and reality, because to that child, 10 years is literally incomprehensible.
Yeah, he has no frame of reference.
Right. He has no object permanence for the wider timeline of life, so he thinks the classroom is his entire existence. The homework, the rules, the playground politics. To him, it feels eternal. He just cannot fathom a reality outside those school walls.
And the argument here is that all of us, no matter our age, are essentially that 5-year-old. Like, we get so consumed by our careers, our mortgages, and our daily dramas that we completely forget we are just sitting at a tiny desk in a temporary building.
We really do.
But your sources contrast that boy with another story, this 80-year-old woman. Someone finds her intently, almost feverishly, reading her Bible. And when they ask her why she's studying so hard at her age, she doesn't say she's just passing the time. She says, I'm swatting for my finals.
Which is such a great phrase. She understood the assignment. She recognized that being enrolled in a school implies a strict evaluation at the end of it. Like, the curriculum isn't just busy work.
Right.
The poet John Keats famously called human life the veil of soul-making. And the theological argument your sources are making is that the hardships, the joys, the tedious chores, the physical pain, all of it, they are the friction required to shape a soul.
They're the prerequisites.
Exactly. Prerequisites for a much larger world.
It makes me think of an analogy. Imagine your life right now is an intense, high-stakes, immersive language course.
Okay. Yeah.
You know those programs where they drop you in a room and you sign a pledge to never speak your native tongue?
Oh, yeah. They're supposed to be brutal.
Right. It is incredibly frustrating. It's exhausting. But you aren't there to get comfortable. You certainly aren't going to start, picking out new curtains for the classroom or get emotionally attached to the folding chairs.
No, of course not.
You are there to learn the vocabulary and the grammar as intensely as possible because you know you are about to be dropped into a foreign country where you actually have to use it.
That framing really captures the essence of Pawson's outline. I mean, if you forget about the country you're traveling to, you will completely waste the language course. But the notes you provided also emphasize a much more sobering reality about how this particular school closes.
Yeah, the suddenness of it.
Right. It doesn't just slowly fade away due to lack of funding. It ends suddenly and violently. And to explain this, the source draws a stark comparison to the Aberfan disaster in the Welsh Valley.
I remember reading about that in the notes, and honestly, it stopped me in my tracks. Aberfan was the 1960s tragedy where a massive, unstable tip of coal slurry collapsed and completely engulfed a local village school in minutes, right?
Yes, just devastating real-world tragedy.
So heavy. Why would the author use something so horrific to illustrate a theological point? I mean, doesn't that just terrify people?
Well, it is a deliberately heavy metaphor. Pawson uses it to explain why the ancient text insists on a sudden, unexpected end. The goal isn't to traumatize the reader, but to aggressively shatter our deeply ingrained complacency.
Ah, I see.
We have this illusion of absolute permanence. We just assume the school will always be there. But by invoking Aberfan, the source forces the listener to grapple with the reality that the end of the current world order won't be a gentle, scheduled fade-out heralded by a polite bell. It interrupts daily life entirely without warning.
Because according to the text, the timeline isn't dictated by human history just sort of running out of steam. It's dictated by intervention.
Exactly.
The source points out that human beings have had our day. We've built our empires, we've fought our wars, we've structured society our way. But this sudden end marks what the ancient writers called the day of the Lord, the moment the Creator steps in to have his day.
And because the source insists on a physical, literal intervention, it naturally has to address the mechanics of what actually happens to the physical earth. It doesn't just remain as a museum. Pawson outlines a specific progression here, starting with the visible return of Jesus stepping back into the timeline.
Which immediately triggers a profound physical dissolution of the world.
Right.
This is where my mind was truly blown by the material you gave us. The text notes that the world was historically judged once with an existing element water, in the account of Noah's flood. But Peter's letter states that the current heavens and earth are reserved for fire. And my assumption was always that this meant some sort of cosmic bombardment, like meteors raining down from space. But the notes completely slip that. The fire isn't coming from outside. It's already here.
Yeah, the linguistic breakdown in your notes is critical for this. The ancient Greek text suggests that the elements will melt with fervent heat. Pawson connects this ancient phrasing directly to modern atomic theory.
Which is wild.
It is. He points out that everything material, every piece of wood, every concrete block, every single atom in the device you are using to listen to this deep dive right now is packed with latent, incomprehensible potential energy.
Wait, so the argument is that a first-century fisherman wrote a theological text that perfectly describes nuclear fission.
That is precisely the theological leap Pawson is making. The argument is that the Creator doesn't need to forge a new external weapon to end the world. The mechanism for its destruction was baked into the architecture of the universe at the moment of creation. Yeah. The strong nuclear force holding atoms together simply needs to be released. The source actually quotes a modern scientist noting that if the right chain reaction were triggered, the latent energy in the universe could bring it up in a matter of minutes.
Just minutes.
Right. So from a theological perspective, the text argues God simply has to remove his sustaining hand, and the elements literally dissolve themselves in fervent heat.
But doesn't that inherently breed that nihilism we talked about earlier? Like, if the universe is literally pre-programmed to burn itself to the ground, why should I care about anything? If the physical world is just kindling, isn't God essentially admitting that the physical creation was a mistake that needs to be permanently deleted?
Well, that is the most common critique of this worldview, for sure. But the source makes a vital distinction here between annihilation and regeneration.
Okay, so a recycling project, not a deletion.
Exactly. Just as Christian theology argues that an individual human needs to be born again or regenerated, it argues the cosmos itself must experience a rebirth. The fire isn't the end of the story. It's a purifying crucible.
Ah, so it burns away the corruption, not the essence. The notes point out a really elegant literary symmetry here, too. Like, if you look at the structure of the Bible, the first 3 pages detail the creation of the original heavens and earth.
Yep.
And the final 3 pages perfectly mirror them, detailing a new heaven and a new earth rising from the ashes of the old.
Right. The material universe is affirmed as inherently good, which is why it gets redeemed rather than abandoned.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because once you introduce this concept to human beings, especially a concept as massive as the latent atomic fire of the cosmos being unleashed, we are biologically and psychologically hardwired to demand a timeline.
Oh, absolutely.
If you tell me the school's going to burn down, my immediate reaction is give me a date so I know when to skip class.
Naturally.
And the source material categorizes our human reactions to this unknown timeline into three very distinct psychological camps.
Right. So the first camp is the fanatics. These are the date setters, the
Yeah.
people who let the unknown just drive them into a total panic.
The ones making the sandwich boards.
Exactly. Pawson provides historical examples in the notes of groups who went up to a hill in Somerset to wait for the sky to split open, or canvassers who knocked on doors throughout the UK, confidently predicting the world would end in 1975.
Which is a fundamental misunderstanding of the assignment. The text explicitly warns against trying to hack the timeline. But the second camp is the one I really want to dig into because it feels so incredibly relevant. Pawson calls them the scoffers, and he notes they suffer from something called the disease of euphoria.
It's such a brilliant term, and euphoria in this context isn't about being overwhelmingly happy. It's a psychological delusion of absolute continuity.
Like nothing will ever change.
Right. The scoffers look around, they see the sun rising, they see the stock market fluctuating, they see the seasons changing, and they declare everything has always been exactly like this since the beginning. Nothing fundamental is ever going to change.
It's a massive defense mechanism. I was reading this part of your notes and thinking about modern psychology, specifically normalcy bias.
Oh, yeah, that fits perfectly.
We are fundamentally wired to ignore slow-moving or massive existential threats just so we can function. You hear about a massive market crash or a terrible illness striking a neighbor, and your brain immediately builds a firewall. It whispers, that is terrible, but it could never happen to me.
Right.
The scoffers are doing that on a cosmic scale. They were sedating themselves with the rhythm of daily routines.
And Peter's counter-argument to these scoffers, as outlined by Pawson, is historical precedent. The scoffers claim God has never intervened, but Peter points directly back to the flood. A whole society vanished because they assumed the weather would always remain the same.
That's a sobering thought.
It is. The theological logic is straightforward. If the Creator intervened once with water when humanity reached a certain threshold of corruption, why is it intellectually arrogant to assume he won't do it again with fire?
Okay, but I have to push back on behalf of the scoffers here. It has been over 2,000 years since these texts were written. Generations of people have lived, suffered, and died waiting for this supposed regeneration. You can't really blame people for thinking it's a fairy tale when the delay is millennia long. How does the source reconcile that massive gap in time?
Well, this brings us to the third camp, the believers. And your notes explain this delay through two intertwined concepts that directly answer your question. The first is divine relativity.
Relativity, okay.
Yeah. The ancient text explicitly states that time simply does not function for a timeless creator the way it functions for biological creatures trapped in a linear timeline. To the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day.
Wait, so 2,000 years of agonizing human history to a being outside of time, that's just a weekend.
Basically, yes. The perspective shifts entirely. But relativity alone paints a picture of a cold, detached God just watching the clock. The second, much more important concept is divine mercy. Right. Why keep the school open at all if the final bell is already scheduled and the students are suffering? Pawson's outline argues that the delay is highly intentional and rooted in compassion.
But wait, if the delay is just to save more people, wouldn't a merciful, timeless God just delay it infinitely so eventually everyone gets saved? I mean, how does a finite end make sense?
Well, the theological framework here balances ultimate justice with extraordinary patience. The text states God is not willing that any should perish. And Pawson calculates this out practically in the notes. Roughly every single day the world continues, tens of thousands of new people across the globe find salvation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the school remains open purely to increase the size of the graduating class. The delay is not a sign of forgetfulness or broken promise. Delay is the mechanism of mercy.
Okay, that makes sense conceptually.
Yeah.
But it brings us right back to the ultimate so what of this deep dive. If you are listening to this and you accept that the world is a temporary classroom slated for demolition, but you also accept that you have absolutely no idea when that's going to happen because the timeline is shrouded in divine mercy, how on earth do you make decisions today? Do you bother getting a degree? Do you bother fixing your roof?
Yeah, the historic critique of this theology is that it makes people useless. You've probably heard the phrase, so heavenly minded, they're of no earthly use.
Yes, exactly.
The assumption is that if you are constantly looking up at the sky waiting for a trumpet, you will ignore the suffering in the streets around you.
Right. If the canvas is going to burn, why bother painting?
Yeah.
But your sources offer the most stunning counterexample to this critique. It centers on a 19th century British politician named Lord Shaftesbury.
Shaftesbury is a fascinating historical case study. He lived during the absolute peak of the Industrial Revolution in Britain, which is a time of horrific exploitation.
The notes detail how he spent his entire life fighting in the political mud. Like, he fought for the children who were working 14-hour days, literally pulling heavy tubs of coal through dark, narrow mine shafts. He fought against the exploitation of pantomime children in the theaters.
He was relentless.
He really was. He championed labor laws, mental health reforms, and education. He was arguably one of the most earthly, useful human beings of his century. But here's the paradox that blew my mind. The source notes that Shaftesbury was a deeply committed believer in the imminent, fiery return of Jesus.
Yep.
In fact, on every single campaign letter he wrote, printed right at the top of his letterhead, was the phrase, "Even so, come Lord Jesus."
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Shaftesbury completely shatters the myth of the passive believer. For him, the impending end of the world wasn't an excuse to zone out, it was the ultimate catalyst for activism.
Because he knew the evaluation was coming.
Exactly. Because he believed he would soon stand before a judge who cared deeply about the oppressed, he fought fiercely to fix the evils of the present world. He wanted his actions to align with the values of the coming kingdom.
It transforms waiting into an active, aggressive pursuit of justice. And Pawson's outline breaks this active waiting down into 3 specific postures the student must take. The first posture is patience. You wait like a farmer waiting for a harvest.
Right.
A farmer doesn't sit on the porch doing nothing, but they also don't go out into the field every 5 minutes, dig up the seeds to see if the roots are growing, and panic. They do the daily grueling work of tending the soil, and they trust the hidden process.
And the second posture the notes outline is arguably the most radical, hastening the day. The text implies that human beings actually have a participatory role in bringing this cosmic timeline forward.
Which sounds crazy at first.
It does. But Pawson illustrates this by pointing to the Wycliffe Bible translators. At the time of his teaching, he noted there were roughly 2,000 languages left on Earth that did not have the scriptures translated for them.
Why does a translation project matter to the end of the universe?
Because of a specific ancient mandate found in the Gospel of Matthew, which Pawson connects here. The gospel must be preached to all nations before the end can come.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the mechanics of the theology suggest that by fulfilling the mission of evangelism, by doing the hard linguistic work of translation, humans are actively checking off the final requirements of the syllabus. You are participating in God's timetable.
You are literally pushing the timeline forward, and that leads to the final posture, preparing seriously. This is where the text asks its central, piercing question. Since all these things are thus to be dissolved, what manner of people ought we to be?
A huge question.
Right. The outline demands holy living and, critically, being at peace with the people around you. Because, wouldn't it be an absolute tragedy if the teacher finally walked back into the classroom and caught all the students viciously attacking each other over who got the best desk?
It all comes back to managing your attachments. Pawson uses a very tangible local example in the notes regarding a church building, the Millmead Center. He reminds his audience that the brick and mortar of their beloved building will eventually be demolished, whether by human zoning laws or cosmic fire.
It's temporary.
Exactly. He also shares a brilliant, slightly humorous anecdote about an aunt who is constantly buying her last stair carpet or her last piece of furniture. She was always anticipating that the end was so near she wouldn't need to replace things again.
We all have an aunt exactly like that. But the psychology behind her actions is actually incredibly sharp.
It is, because the underlying principle is about emotional detachment from the temporary. Do not let your heart sink its deepest roots into things destined for the bonfire. If your core identity is tied up in your bank account, your property, or your earthly status, you will be utterly devastated when the material world dissolves. A future hope is supposed to engineer present holiness. Your attachments must forcibly shift from the material elements to eternal realities, things like your character, your integrity, and how you show grace to others.
Let's take a step back and look at the massive journey your notes just took us on. We started by completely reframing human existence. The pain, the joy, the mundane Tuesday morning commute is all just curriculum in a temporary school for Christians.
Right.
We looked at the impending day of the Lord not as a random act of cosmic terrorism, but as a calculated, fiery regeneration of a corrupted universe. We explored the deep psychological traps of trying to guess the date like the fanatics, or falling into the dangerous normalcy bias of the scoffers.
And critically, we unpacked the paradox of Lord Shaftesbury. We saw that knowing the school will eventually close doesn't mean you stop caring about your classmates. Instead, the reality of that future evaluation actively fuels present-day patience, justice, and purpose.
The ultimate call to action in your sources is simple, but incredibly demanding. You are called to graduate with honors. Pawson stresses that while the foundational beliefs of the faith, like the core apostolic teachings, are immutable and shouldn't change, the student absolutely must change. You cannot remain stagnant.
No, you
You
can't.
can't just fill your head with apocalyptic trivia and timelines. You have to grow in grace.
You mature within the boundaries of the truth. True theological knowledge isn't about passing a written exam. It is a relational knowledge that fundamentally rewires how you treat the oppressed, how you spend your money, and how you view your enemies.
Which leaves us with one final lingering thought for you to chew on. Something that isn't explicitly laid out in the pages of your notes, but is the natural, inevitable question this entire deep dive points toward.
Yeah.
If this entire complex, heartbreaking, and beautiful human existence, if all of this pain and joy is merely the school, merely the immersive language course required to prepare us for a regenerated new heaven and new earth.
What unimaginably vast responsibilities are we actually graduating into?
Exactly. What will the ultimate career be on the other side of that cosmic fire that requires such an intense, agonizing, soul-making prerequisite? Something to think about the next time you feel stuck in the classroom. Keep swatting for your finals.